For thousands of years, artists have painted and sculpted the naked human body. Sometimes divine and idealized, sometimes scandalous and censored. Across centuries, the genre of the nude in art has reflected shifting ideals of beauty and morality and carried a multitude of symbols. What made the nude such a central subject in Western art? And how did the meaning of the nude change from one era to another? Let's dive into the history of the nude in art. The earliest known representations of the nude go back tens of thousands of years in Paleolithic art, with sculpted figurines, mostly female, emphasizing fertility and femininity. In ancient times, likely due to the climate, Egyptians wore minimal clothing. Nudity was viewed as natural and commonly depicted in art, from court festivities and ceremonies to everyday scenes of peasants, craftsmen, shepherds, and fishermen at work. It also appeared in religious contexts, as many anthropomorphic gods were shown nude or semi-nude in statues and wall paintings. In ancient Greece, the nude became a central ideal. Male athletic bodies symbolized heroism, virtue, virility, and the perfection of the human form, reminiscent of the athletes of the Olympic Games, who competed naked. The Greek nude combined realism and idealization, realistic in its accurate depiction of the body, yet idealized in its pursuit of harmonious, balanced proportions. From the more rigid compositions of the archaic period, the depiction of the body evolved to show greater detail of the skeleton and muscles. Human figures gradually appeared in life-size representations, as well as providing movement, especially with the introduction of the contrapposto, where the body's parts are harmoniously balanced, creating rhythm and stability in the figure. With his Discobolus, Myron created a stunning example of a figure in motion, achieving for the first time a fully coordinated dynamic effect, whereas earlier moving figures had been constructed in separate parts. The female nude was less frequent, especially in the archaic period, where the naked choroi contrasted with the clothed chori. In Greek society, women were mostly confined to household duties, and unlike male athletes, they were fully dressed. The earliest depictions of female nudity appear in the 6th century before Common Era on everyday scenes painted on ceramics. The leading classical sculptor of the female nude was Praxiteles, who created the famous Aphrodite of Cnidus, shown just stepping into her bath, holding her dress in one hand. Later, the female nude evolved into types like the Venus Pudica, where she modestly covers her breasts with her arms, a motif that would be revisited throughout the centuries. During the Hellenistic period, as Greek culture spread across the Eastern Mediterranean, the figures took on greater dynamism and movement, expressing heightened emotions and tragic feelings of defeat, drama, and suffering, breaking away from the serene balance of the classical era. As for Roman art, it preserved a certain idealism, while showing a stronger focus on naturalism in its portraits. In painting and mosaics, particularly in Pompeii and Herculaneum, nudity was common in scenes of dance and entertainment, often leaning toward eroticism, depicted without restraint. As the Roman Empire declined and Christianity rose, attitudes towards the body changed. The nude lost much of its prominence in art. Nudity was often avoided or reserved for explicitly biblical contexts, such as Adam and Eve or Christ's Passion. In medieval Christian art, the human body was viewed more as a perishable vessel for the soul than an object of beauty, and nakedness was sometimes framed as shameful or sinful unless justified by scripture. In Christian art, symbolic language mattered more than the realistic representation of reality. That explains why depictions of the nude are often distorted or even deliberately unattractive, far from the harmonious balance of the classical ideal. The female figure depicted with bulging bellies, small breasts, narrow shoulders, and straight legs became the prototype of the Gothic female nude, which would last for 200 years. In the 15th century, the nude became more widespread, within the fashionable style of the time known as International Gothic, which emerged around 1400 in France, Burgundy, and the Netherlands. One of its earliest examples is the Very Rich Hours of the Duke of Berry by the Limbourg brothers, where the scene of the fall and expulsion from paradise depicts Eve's transformation from the innocence of life in Eden to the shame of sin and expulsion, taking on the pose of a Venus pudica. Little by little, the modest medieval view of nudity as something shameful gave way to figures that were more sensual, more provocative, and more physically human. The more or less naturalistic nude began to appear tentatively in pre-Renaissance Italy. The Renaissance brought a renewed fascination with classical antiquity and humanism, placing the human body once again at the center of artistic study. Artists focused on anatomy, proportion, and perspective, drawing inspiration from ancient Greece and Rome models. During the Renaissance, nudity stopped being something shameful and instead took on a new heroic, even sacred quality. The nude gradually became secularized, moving away from medieval religious themes toward more profane ones. Renaissance art revived the classical nude as an expression of ideal beauty, both physical and moral. It became the perfect pretext for every kind of composition, from the most naturalistic to the most symbolic, the latter filled with allegories and personifications. One of the first works to break with the past and mark a return to classical ideals was Donatello's David. Unlike the athletic figures of ancient Greece, Donatello's model shows the delicate, slender body of a teenage boy. He also moved away from classical proportions, particularly in the torso. After Donatello, the nude became more dynamic, capturing movement, energy, and an almost ecstatic emotion. Botticelli revived the female nude after the moral restraint of the Middle Ages. Drawing inspiration from classical art, he shaped an archetype of beauty, with deeply intellectual and symbolic figures that became the very definition of the classical ideal from the Renaissance onward. Moving away from the solid sculptural forms of antiquity, Botticelli favored delicate, slender figures that reflected a more modern vision of the human body. In The Birth of Venus, his goddess stands completely nude, free from any moral restraint. She follows the Venus pudica pose, covering herself with her arms while the soft undulating lines of her body and flowing hair give the impression that she's floating in air. Leonardo da Vinci moved away from classical ideals, creating naturalistic figures based on his extensive anatomical studies. Yet, despite his deep scientific fascination with the human body, documented in hundreds of drawings, he painted only a few nudes. Interestingly, for Leonardo, anatomy was mainly a tool to understand human proportions for his figures, even when they were clothed in the final work, rather than an end in itself. The Renaissance nude reached its peak with Michelangelo, for whom the human body held a divine essence. In his religious works, the suffering of Christ gives way to a serene spiritual strength. His figures are muscular and dynamic, with powerful torsos, strong contours, and bold torsions. Though they echo classical balance and may look like Greek statues, their exaggerated proportions and tense expressions reveal a deeply personal vision filled with emotional intensity. In the 16th century, the nude became a widely accepted artistic theme across Europe, largely due to engravings of classical Greco-Roman works. The Venetian school both continued classical traditions while exploring new techniques and styles. Giorgione's and Titian's nudes, with their generous proportions and full waists, set a standard for the Venetian female nude that lasted for decades and influenced artists beyond Italy through Dürer, reaching Germany, the Netherlands, among a bourgeois audience eager for such works, and even later Rubens in the Baroque era. In Northern Europe, Hieronymus Bosch maintained a link to Gothic forms, but with greater naturalism and boundless imagination. Naked figures, both human and monstrous, abound in scenes overflowing with lust. In medieval iconography, nudity often symbolized the dead or the damned, while the living were shown clothed, marking a moral and spiritual distinction between earthly life and the afterlife. Lucas Cranach the Elder developed his own version of the nude, rooted in Gothic tradition, while Dürer evolved from Gothic forms toward Italian Renaissance classicism inspired by Venetian models, notably the female canons of Giorgione and Titian. Hans Holbein the Younger, on the other hand, focused mainly on religious paintings and portraits and rarely depicted the nude, though his masterpiece, The Body of the Dead Christ in the Tomb, stands out as a remarkable exception. By the late 16th century, Mannerism transformed these ideals with exaggerated proportions, complex poses, dramatic compositions, and emotional intensity, replacing classical harmony with a more imaginative and expressive vision of beauty. Artists showed the world as they imagined it, not as it really was. Meanwhile, in France, mannerism mainly developed through the school of Fontainebleau, known for its courtly, sensual style and decorative richness. In Spain, the Renaissance arrived late. El Greco was one of the main innovators of Spanish painting at the time, trained in the Venetian school. Although most of his works are religious, he often included nude figures when justified by the theme, with over 100 nudes across his entire work. In the Baroque period, the female nude remained central, appealing to aristocratic patrons. Mythological subjects and allegorical portraits, where naked women embodied concepts like justice or truth, became common. The classical heroic diagonal evolved into the heroic spiral, using dynamic, exaggerated movement to convey drama and intensity. Rubens placed great emphasis on the design of his figures, studying earlier artists in depth. His robust and carnally sensual female figures defined the ideal of beauty in his time. He excelled at capturing skin tones, textures, and giving his figures a sense of weight and solidity. He was also a master at making his compositions dynamic, drawing inspiration, for example, from the undulating movement of the Laocoon. In contrast, Rembrandt inherited the rounded forms of the Nordic Gothic nude. He followed nature rather than rules, driven by a bold realism and perhaps compassion for society's marginalized, the elderly, prostitutes, drunks, beggars, and the disabled. Guided by a biblical sense of Christianity, he saw poverty and ugliness as natural and as deserving of attention, as wealth and beauty. In Italy, Caravaggio pioneered a style called Caravaggism, grounded in strict naturalism and marked by bold chiaroscuro, called tenebrism, to achieve dramatic and striking effects through the interplay of light and shadow. In Bologna, Marcantonio Franceschini embodied the idealized side of the Baroque nude. Influenced by Carracci, he sought harmony and purity through graceful forms and soft light, offering a moral and serene vision far from Caravaggio's realism or Rembrandt's compassion. In Spain, the nude remained mainly a religious theme, although it also explored allegorical and mythological subjects, and the Baroque style persisted there well into the mid-18th century. However, Diego Velázquez enjoyed considerable freedom, likely due to his position as royal painter to Philip IV, allowing him to depict more nudes than any other Spanish artist of his time. Venus at her mirror is one of the most famous nudes in history. Its originality lies in showing Venus from behind, which was rare at the time. Her pose looking into a mirror probably represents an allegory of vanity. In the Baroque period, the nude also developed significantly in sculpture. We must mention Gian Lorenzo Bernini in Italy, whose works captured the dynamic, sinuous movement typical of the Baroque, showcasing his mastery of modeling and the drama of the action. And in France, we can mention artists such as Pierre Puget and François Girardon, whose sculptures adorned the gardens of the Château de Versailles at that time. The 17th century also saw the rise of classicism in Italy and France, characterized by idealized forms, noble subjects inspired by the ancients, balanced and harmonious compositions, with restrained and controlled emotion. The nude remained a core subject in academic training, serving as a test of technical skill and mastery of the human form. The academic tradition codified rules for the nude: ideal proportions, polished finish, and tasteful modesty, often following the Venus Pudica pose. In Italy, Annibale Carracci and Guido Reni, from the Bolognese school, produced numerous mythological allegories and paintings of gods and heroes, where nudity emphasizes their dignity and grandeur. And in France, Nicolas Poussin is seen as the pioneer of the academic nude, creating cultured, idealized figures inspired by mythology and ancient history. In the early 18th century, the Rococo style emerged alongside the Baroque, focusing on decoration, refinement, and elegance. As the bourgeoisie rose and the Enlightenment spread, artists moved away from religious subjects toward worldly themes that celebrated luxury and social status. The nude of this period, influenced by Rubens' rich colors and lifelike textures, took on a refined yet provocative eroticism. In France, where it flourished most, echoes of Gothic elegance remained in the elongated bodies with small breasts and prominent stomachs. By mid-century, the ideal shifted to the petite, slender figure, exemplified in Boucher and Fragonard's paintings. A major precursor of Spanish Romanticism, Goya's work stands out for its unique character. His masterpiece in the nude genre, La Maja Desnuda, painted alongside La Maja Vestida, is one of the first nudes to clearly show pubic hair. Unlike traditional nudes, it isn't tied to historical, mythological, or religious themes, simply an anonymous woman seen in an intimate, almost voyeuristic manner. Romanticism emphasized emotion, imagination, and individual experience over classical restraint and idealized forms. Artists explored dramatic, sometimes supernatural or literary subjects, using expressive poses, intense gestures, and striking compositions to convey passion and psychological depth. After the French Revolution, the rising bourgeoisie favored a return to pure, austere classical forms, rejecting the ornamental excess of Baroque and Rococo linked to the aristocracy. Influenced by Pompeii and Herculaneum, neoclassical nudes revived Greco-Roman shapes, but stripped of their spirit and ideals, focusing solely on form detached from life. In sculpture, the great neoclassical sculptor par excellence was Antonio Canova, who drew inspiration from the great Renaissance masters. His works combined the serenity and harmony of pure classicism with human sensitivity and a decorative Italian touch. Jacques-Louis David was the leading figure of neoclassicism, adopting an academic style inspired by Raphael and Poussin, marked by severity, balance, and technical precision. François Gérard pursued ideal beauty through soft colors and smooth cerulean-toned skin. He maintained the classical ideal but softened its severity, leaning toward a sensual, erotically graceful style. Anne-Louis Giraudet, on the other hand, broke from David's moral classicism, notably in The Sleep of Endymion, with elongated pearly bodies and subtle sexual ambiguity, as well as in his more or less flattering portraits of Mademoiselle Lange as Venus and Danae. Painting black skin was a rare and little-taught exercise at the time, considered ungrateful. The portrait of Madeleine, painted by Marie-Guillemine Benoist in 1800, 6 years after a decree abolishing slavery, shows her looking directly at the viewer. Seated in a medallion-backed chair draped with rich fabric, she occupies the position traditionally reserved for white women until then. This topic is explored in multiple parts, and that's the end of part 1, covering the nude from antiquity through the late 18th century. In the next part, we'll see how the nude evolved from the 19th century to today and how artists have continually reinterpreted this timeless theme. I hope you enjoyed this first part. If you did, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. Thanks for watching.